Hi, Serena. I'm Eric Prout. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Hi.
How's everything?
Going all right. Yeah. What about you?
Good. It's been a busy conference.
I'm sure
I
it
got,
looked very well organized.
I don't know about that, but it's something. And we had a lot of grad student competitions today. I was shuffling between sessions to make sure I saw everything and all that good stuff.
Yeah, Zoom can be stressful for sure.
Yeah, that's what it is. Well, we're early, which is great. I'm assuming people will sort of just straggle in.
Okay,
I
that's
hope it
great.
doesn't distract you.
No worries. I am used to that.
It's a new way of communicating for sure.
Yes, indeed.
So, do you live in Oklahoma City? Are you part of the community? I assume.
Yes. Yeah, I live in Oklahoma City.
Okay. Mhm. I looked at the website. It's very visual. The nice photos. United We Dream.
Oh, of United We Dream?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was. And it was also. I mean, this is just a statement, not a positive or negative, but it's clear like a lot of these groups are trying to figure out how to attract donors. And so donations was a very big part. I could tell the way it was bogging down, loading up, it was because that needed to be there.
No, most definitely. Doing this kind of work takes a lot of resources, so
Yeah.
yeah.
So just heads up, we got about 100 people registered for the meeting last night at our key talk. It was only about 30 though. So
Okay.
um, typically in our conference, the keynotes are kind of like tied to kind of like a buffet lunch or dinner or something like
Mhm.
that. So it tends to be more of a captive audience, even though it's bigger numbers. I think the people that show up for these kind of things actually really want to hear, or they're more active and they feel like they
Right.
don't have to be at the some social event by coercion.
Yeah, no, I get how conferences are. That's not a problem.
Yeah. Do you know? I'm assuming Laurel was your contact, but I don't know if
Yeah,
that's for sure. Yeah.
it was just Laurel.
And then Jennifer would have contacted you. She's currently the treasurer for our organization. I'm the chair this year, so
Got it. Okay.
and we kind of got pulled into organizing the meeting because we want to come to Oklahoma City next year as an actual, assuming pandemics.
Right. So where are you located?
I'm in College Station, Texas,
Okay.
at Texas A&M.
Got it.
And I just see Ron jumped on. He's one of our regular SWAAG people. He's at Texas State in San Marcos.
Hello, how are you?
Hi, I'm great. Good to meet you.
Absolutely. Thank you for your presentation. You haven't even done it yet.
Thank you. I hope that it is engaging.
I'm sure it will be.
Hey, Emily.
Hey,
How'd
the
your,
rest of the
how'd the
conference?
workshop? It's going
Oh.
well.
Yeah,
How'd the workshop go?
went good.
Yeah, I jumped in for a second, but I was judging.
Yeah, we were testing out a thing called Poll Everywhere, and we had never tried that before. So I appreciated that everyone was willing to let us try out technical things.
That's cool.
Yeah, try to make it a little more interactive since Zoom fatigue is real.
Do you guys have a lot of Zoom meetings as part of AAG? Or is everything Zoom between meetings?
Yeah, so right now we're all working from home because no one's in the office in DC. It's still work from home land over here. So we haven't done like a ton of Zoom meetings, but we use Slack. And so we do a lot of Slack calls. It's our primary way of communicating with each other. But we're also our staff's small, so it's pretty easy just to get on a call with one or two people.
Yeah.
What are the advantages of Slack, Emily?
I think Slack's really good because it reduces emails. So you can have direct messages with everyone in Slack, but you can also have like certain channels. So like if you had like a committee, then that could have its own channel so everyone could just see all of the conversations right there, and you can share files and stuff in that one channel together. And then it's kind of like Google, where you can just like video call a person right in Slack. So that makes it a little nice to just connect pretty quick.
Judy, are you up, Andy?
Hey, Laurel.
Hi.
Hey, Laurel.
Hey, Serena.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. Very excited.
So collective sense, do we want to wait a couple minutes or do we want to allow people to break in as Serena's talking? We have a collective wisdom on this one?
Give folks a few minutes, I think, is fine. And
Okay.
that's all right with Serena. She's her prerogative.
Okay. The silence is deafening though. It's
How have the other sessions been going? Everything flowing smoothly?
Yeah, in my opinion, they're flowing. Not too many hiccups from what I can tell. I think we had to get used to the poster sessions, the way we created like a breakout rooms, and Jennifer created breakout rooms that were in the name of the contestant or the person who's the author of the poster. So it was really easy to kind of navigate in and out. I think there were, I don't know, I'm working off a laptop. It was hard to see a giant PDF file of a poster on the size of a laptop screen, but you know, little things we have to get used to. We should create like a post meeting. What are some suggestions for Zoom for, because they clearly designed it not with us in mind, you know, little things like maybe like a little clock, a timer, so something like that, or I don't know.
That's right. It's been hard to get away from usual tasks in order to join and catch all the goodness.
Do you guys work at home or do you guys go in, can you go to your can you go to your offices on campus, Laurel? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But I'm not there.
So for those just adding or jumping in, we're waiting a couple minutes to see if some more people pop in before we get started. Does anybody have a favorite paper or poster yet? No, that's dangerous, but
That's right. Maybe an audience award paper. That would be something new for the regional division for SWAAG. Audience award.
I kind of like that the sessions are sort of mixed together because I feel like I've got to see some talks that I wouldn't have normally picked to see. So it's been kind of fun.
that's called the program committee of one that doesn't have enough to do, you know? I like the idea of self-naming your sessions though. I think that that should be an
Like
idea.
roulette, geography
Yeah.
roulette. I'll just go to geography 2 and see what happens. Are you all getting a cold spell in the SWAG region? because we're getting a cold spell in DC.
We did have something pass through. I imagine it's worse further north, but
Maybe it passed through to me.
I don't know. We
It was
have to ask
crazy windy
climate
yesterday.
people which pattern applies.
We were down in the 30s here in Little Rock at night, but still.
Yeah, it was 35 this morning.
We haven't had a solid freeze yet because I just walked outside 30 minutes ago and got a mosquito bite. So we haven't had that freeze that takes away the mosquitoes yet.
I'm holding out hope for a freeze so that my allergies will go away. Everyone thinks I'm ill.
Can't the AAG afford free testing? Come on, it sounds like symptoms to me.
We have so many free tests in DC. You can go to any of the fire stations and get a free test.
Are those EMTs at the fire station though? Are they?
Yeah, I think so.
We have cute little kiosks on campus.
No, little like tents.
No, they're little maroon colored. They're hard roofed, and I don't know how I'm not sure how the workers stay safe per se, but it's like they've been advertising it and pushing it.
That's good.
Yeah. Even just since we're killing time, it's like the rate in our community went up after Halloween, like a lot of college towns. But when the university does their so-called random testing, we're still just getting 1% positive. So I don't know what that means other than people are self-identifying when they think they have symptoms or risk. And because then it's like positive 7-8% when people are self-selecting. So.
Someone was telling our students to go off campus to get tested. Don't go to the health center because they will report it. And because they were thinking that whether or not we stayed on campus was going to be affected by how many, and to some degree it was, but the administrators were like, no, it's also going to be the community spread that's going to affect whether or not we shut down. If everyone shuts down in the county, we're shutting down too. So it's just very silly that the students thought that, oh, well, don't tell anyone.
Yeah.
Missed the point entirely.
Well, I think they're also saying it in a way in which their little bubble cluster kind of like, I don't want to put Greeks on, the top of that list, but, sororities and fraternities and also dorms by name. There's a lot of that, where if you get your test on campus and they identify the potential cluster, and then everybody that you think you're friends with now has to do the 10-day isolation. And Bill's here. We can get started now. We probably should go ahead and get started. You ready, Serena? Okay. Welcome to our second of our keynote speakers. Tonight we brought someone from outside the geography community, someone who's actually in the community we were hoping to have our geography meeting in Oklahoma City. And through word of mouth and good vibes from people in Oklahoma, we were approached with the idea of asking Serena to give us a presentation, and we reached out and she was very grateful to say yes, because we're not the deep pocket contributors per se to certain things, but the intrigue here is really high. And she came up with a title for us, Undeniable Power and Transformation, How Immigrant Youth Won in 2020. And I think maybe you can explain it better, how your relationship with United We Dream is, and kind of the dynamic in which we were talking about when we were figuring out how to get it all going. But I'll turn the table over to you, or the floor, the Zoom screen to you. So go ahead, and if you want to share screen, you're welcome to.
Yes, great. Okay, thank you so much, Eric. It's really good to be here with you all over Zoom. I am joining you all today from Comanche, Kickapoo, Osage, and Wichita Land, also known as Oklahoma City. And I realize that this is a long conference, and as someone said earlier, Zoom fatigue is real. I have been working from home for the past, since March, so I'm just racking up the hours on Zoom. They need to have a rewards program or something like that. But I want to extend a thank you to the University of Oklahoma, who I guess is kind of still hosting this. I don't really know. But definitely extending a thank you to the Southwest Division of American Association of Geographers, just for being interested in what young organizers have to say, and for just letting us have this space to talk about the issues that we're facing and the change we're trying to make. So I will talk about the effects of COVID-19 on especially immigrant communities, but just the disenfranchised and vulnerable communities in general across the country. And I can talk also about how youth, immigrant youth in particular, are at the forefront of this kind of change that we need to see, including in Oklahoma. So I'm really excited to share this presentation, and I will share my screen. Perfect. Here we go. So, as Eric said, my name is Serena Prammanasudh. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the Outreach Teams Manager at United We Dream, the largest immigrant youth-led network in the country. And before joining United We Dream in February of this year, I also served as Executive Director of Dream Action Oklahoma, which was the affiliate of United We Dream, and I was Executive Director for 2 years. So at United We Dream, our focus is to empower immigrants to own their voice and transform their fear into power and direct action. So we are fighting for justice and dignity for all immigrants and all people and we believe in order that to enact the type of solutions that we need and the policies that we need to protect people without hurting other people, we have that power to uplift the stories of the directly impacted people and invest in their leadership and their organizing. So what I've learned from my time with Dream Action Oklahoma and now with United We Dream is that directly impacted individuals are incredibly effective at organizing and strategizing to win victories that force change that they know their communities need and deserve. And we're not fighting for Band-Aid reforms. We are demanding bold, progressive policy solutions that address the root causes of inequities that are propped up by racism, white supremacy, and settler colonialism. So as a child myself of immigrants and as an ally to the immigrant justice movement who has loved ones who are directly impacted, I know that my role and my responsibility is to uplift their voices and create space for young, directly impacted people so that their ideas, their solutions, their lived experiences are front and center in creating the policies, narrative, and government change that our communities need to live without fear. So everyone, regardless of their immigration status, deserves to live a life free of a life of dignity, with freedom to move, freedom to stay, and the freedom to thrive. So I will have to do a little bit of immigration background. So just to set it up with COVID and everything. So we've seen time and time again throughout our nation's history that Black, Brown, Indigenous, and immigrant communities especially have been subject to countless inhumane abuses. And we've seen that within just the past 4 years alone, I don't have to say it, but just to recap, we've seen thousands of children ripped from their parents' arms, thrown into cages upon arrival to the US. We've seen immigrant communities targeted by immigration agents and constantly facing risk of deportation. We've seen women held in detention camps who have been forcibly sterilized. And there have been Cameroonian, especially, but other African refugees that were tortured in detention camps and forced to sign their own voluntary removal orders in retribution for speaking out about the unjust treatment that they faced. And these are recent instances. I believe all this was just in the past 2 years. and they add to this pattern of abuses against immigrants and BIPOC communities that have long been part of our history, right? So the fact is that upon arrival to the US, immigrants of color face an inhumane and unjust immigration system that not only values profit over people, but was inherently built to inflict pain and trauma on our communities. So for context, September 11th, 2001 is when organizers and the immigrant justice movement witnessed how immigration enforcement and national security were being conflated in new and really troubling ways. So while immigrant communities faced abuses well before 2001, this was a period in our history when, in the name of fighting terrorism, President George W. Bush created the Department of Homeland Security in 2002. So within DHS, immigrants and immigrants were considered matters of national security. And of course, the creation of this department led to increased racial profiling, xenophobia, and as a result, local and federal law enforcement were targeting Muslims, Black immigrants, and non-Muslim immigrants of color at higher rates, often leading to detention and or deportation by the main branches of the department, which were Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, and Customs and Border Protection, CBP. So nationwide, thousands would be impacted by the post-9/11 enforcement regime, which produced an expanding infrastructure that supported local and federal law enforcement to criminalize, target, track, and deport immigrants. And within this infrastructure, we saw the increase in racial profiling, heightened policing, enhanced militarization of the US-Mexico border, and enhanced militarization of police. And of course, the implementation of racist federal policies and systems like the National Security Entry-Exit Registration System, which is also known as NSEERS. And this is a system that targeted immigrants from over 25 countries, and it was largely based on their ethnicity, their national origin, and their religion. So ICE and CBP commit these human rights abuses and violations because our government enables them. Our government has enabled them as hyper-politicized, armed wings of racist politicians' anti-immigrant agendas that are fundamentally rooted in white supremacy and neocolonialism. So one of our demands and key efforts for the past several years has been to get our justice movement to abolish these agencies. And any agency that, for us, any agency rooted in white supremacy is beyond reform. So experiencing these and a number of abuses directly impacted folks are also calling for the same thing, for abolition of these agencies. And as allies, it's our responsibility to uplift and listen, as those closest to the pain are always going to be those that are closest to the solutions. And one of the defining issues of this year, of course, has been the uprisings around the country and protests for Black lives. And so these have been some of the largest protests in our recent history as a country. And United We Dream has been honored to work with UndocuBlack and the Movement for Black Lives to work to defund and abolish the police. So most importantly, we are able to get aligned this year that our fight for immigrant justice is also our fight for racial justice, and our liberation is, of course, tied together. So we know that family separation does not just happen at the border and at the hands of immigration enforcement agencies. Criminalization, mass incarceration has been separating Black and brown families for more than half a century. And we know that family separation is a colonial and US government manufactured tactic since the genocide of indigenous peoples. Further, our fight for immigrant justice, through this fight for immigrant justice, we've witnessed the ways in which ICE, CBP, and local police work together. And we've known this for years. We've seen it for years. Our members describe how they've been pulled over by local police and they end up somehow in, ICE custody. But this summer really connected all those dots between immigration enforcement and policing institutions. So we saw ICE and CBP agents deployed to target Black Lives Matter protesters in Portland. There were ICE agents in Boston who just stopped a Black person who was jogging in their neighborhood. And we know that the reach of ICE and CBP is not exclusive to immigration concerns at a federal level. So in many ways, these agencies are just an extension of local and state enforcement, and they often work together with local police to target immigrants. ICE and CBP not only help target Black and brown people, but they share data. They have formal contracts that are called 287G contracts that are at the county level with sheriffs. And this program allows ICE to deputize local law enforcement officers so that they can get away with racial profiling and can ask for proof of status. So it's not like a stop and frisk, but it's like a stop and show me your papers type of policy. So enforcement on all levels, of course, with ICE and CBP to sheriff's offices to local police, we know is rooted in a history of countless violations against communities of color. And at United We Dream, our calls to abolish ICE are tied to calls to abolish enforcement at all levels of government. And we know that these agencies don't actually promote public safety. They were built to target, remove, harm, and often kill Black and brown people. We get this a lot, like, what are you going to do after you abolish systems? What's next? What happens to quote unquote criminals, right? But reform has been a failed rallying call for decades, and incremental progress and backtracking has really not delivered a life without fear, discrimination, and death for non-white communities. So we believe in abolition because we have to envision and imagine human-centered systems based on values of dignity, rehabilitation, and freedom from punitive and dehumanizing institutions. And in place of for-profit exploitative systems, it's incumbent upon our generation, the Gen Zers, after us, to build the kind of society that doesn't need prisons, it doesn't need police, that doesn't need ICE or CBP. And this is really the work of our time that we are committed to. So, of course, this year might mark the end of constant attacks against our communities by the outgoing administration, but it also marks a period of public awakening about the true nature of policing, and it also highlighted once again the disproportionate, the inequities that come about and are highlighted by a pandemic like COVID-19. So while the pandemic is certainly being felt around the world, and especially in the US, I think we just surpassed 2 million cases, it's really no surprise that the effects are extremely disproportionate. COVID-19 has highlighted these deep structural inequalities that have existed in our society and consistently put communities of color, especially low-income Black and brown communities, on the line. And since news of the virus became known in late February and in March, there have been countless reports that highlight this disproportionate impact on communities of color. So specifically, Black and brown communities are infected and killed at a much higher rate. We all know this, but the stats still tell a deeper story. So other reports say Black people are 4 times more likely to die from COVID. And in some states like Illinois, African Americans account for roughly 45% of the number of COVID-19 deaths, yet they only constitute 16% of the state's total population. In California, the Latinx groups have been hit the hardest, and with Latinx people constituting over 60% of the state's total cases and nearly 49% of the deaths. And then there's recent data from the Human Rights Campaign Foundation that looked at the economic effects. And of course, United We Dream, we are a queer youth immigrant-led institution, so we are very focused on how COVID-19 has disproportionately affected LGBTQ folks. And data shows that 20% of Latinx LGBTQ respondents became unemployed because of COVID, compared to 16% of non-LGBT Latinx respondents and 11% of that same general sample population. And it's not a surprise. Among the hardest hit by COVID-19 are also immigrant communities, many of whom have been excluded from the federal stimulus packages much needed federal relief that they need, right? Because they're often the essential workers. They don't have access to healthcare normally. They are the first to encounter, employment cuts. They're at increased risk because of the nature of their work normally. Several of our staff members here are documented, so they have temporary protection from deportation and temporary work authorization. And a lot of them have family members who got COVID and they were not able to receive any kind of benefits from the stimulus packages. So, that is just one story. My coworker is just one story of many of the immigrant families that were excluded. It's estimated that 15.4 million people in families from mixed status households, meaning just people that are maybe they have DACA, or maybe they have they're green card holders, or maybe some are undocumented. But that's what I mean when I say mixed status households. But that's the estimate, is 15.4 million people from mixed status households excluded. And I want to just also give you an opportunity to see some of the stories that we were able to collect earlier this year as we tried to change the narrative about who's actually receiving the stimulus packages, because undocumented people have been left out.
As soon as I get to work, we basically prep by washing up to our wrist. We have to go and spray the baskets, the cards, all the way from top to bottom, wipe the handles, wipe the glass, move forward to the back where we have more refrigerators with the milk, eggs, all that good stuff. In general, I never saw myself playing any essential role, let alone working at a grocery store. And yeah, it did freak me out at first, because I remember many of the people who were dying were people who were working at grocery stores. The hardest part of doing my job currently under the whole coronavirus pandemic has been the attitude of some people out there. Recently, I had a situation where a customer tried to kind of dehumanize me by demanding I tell him my SAT scores. But it's also really mentally exhausting to think that I might potentially bring something to my house, where I have my mom who has had asthma issues in the past. However, I felt it was part of my duty as who I am to be here for my community, especially for my coworkers who are elderly. Thinking about potentially losing my DACA status during COVID is extremely scary, knowing that I'm one of the main people providing for my family. I know there's countless more people out there who have DACA providing for their families right now. I want other undocumented people, regardless of their status, whether they have DACA, TPS, or just no status at all, that if you're not ready to come out yet, just know that there are people not only fighting for themselves, because when I fight for my whole community. We can move mountains together.
Yes, so that is just one of the stories we were able to collect. Victor is a member in Wyoming, as you saw, and he talked about DACA potentially being taken away during the pandemic. I don't know if y'all followed any of that, but any day through like March to June, we were waiting for the Supreme Court to come down with a decision on whether DACA would stand, or what would happen if they would revoke all of the DACA permits and the protections. And we actually won that fight at the Supreme Court. So there was some good news this year. But that's what Victor was referring to in the story. So the last thing here, of course, we can't talk about immigrants and COVID-19 without talking about the almost 50,000 immigrants that are held in detention camps. They face a COVID-19 case rate that's roughly 13 times higher than the general US population. And of course, it's no surprise they face very overcrowded conditions where social distancing is impossible. They lack the proper personal protective equipment. In some jails that I know of here, there's not even like running water sometimes. So it's just really impossible to prevent contracting COVID if you become exposed. To this day, we know that 8 immigrants have died while in ICE custody from COVID-19, and there have been over 6,000 people infected. And of course, that data, we know there could be more, that we can't always trust the data that ICE puts out, right? So definitely the effects of the pandemic have highlighted the structural inequities that exist in the communities across the country, but especially for poor and working class communities who may already be struggling with access to affordable and adequate healthcare. The pandemic has really shown that we need reforms from the grassroots. We need, real structural change and not just simple Band-Aid reforms. And we don't just need a bunch of stimulus packages, although that would help keep our communities afloat right now. Rather, what we need, like I said, are deep structural changes that recognize the root issues are white supremacy, are neocolonialism, and that they're inherent to the foundation of these systems that on purpose and intentionally work to dispossess and harm communities of color. So grassroots organizers have been were at the forefront of this fight and leading the work across the country to help them understand that the roots of these problems are exactly the white supremacy that we were fighting for the last 4 years, and encouraging people at the grassroots to be involved in critical efforts and actions that are needed to usher in bold progressive changes. So I'm finally getting to the second fun part, which is about Oklahoma. And when you think of states where grassroots organizing is building the kind of momentum for deep structural changes, you don't really think about Oklahoma. At least I wouldn't, and I'm from here. So I challenge you to consider Oklahoma's fertile ground for the kind of cross-movement and transformative power building that we know is needed, not just for immigrant communities to thrive and survive, but also for all other future generations. So of course, what do we know about Oklahoma? It was the 46th state to enter the Union after illegal land runs dispossessed tribal communities, and it to this day remains the epitome of settler colonialism. It is a politically majority red state as of the last half of this century, and ranks second in the country for incarceration rates per capita, after the largest state commutation in our history this year. And of course, it is first in the world for women incarcerated per capita. So you may not know that during the beginning of the 20th century, there were communities here that were organized and had plans to create an all-Black state. Like there's a charter for that. There's also a charter for an indigenous state. There were plans to create a socialist state and a state inclusive of queer communities. So that is really, the story and the history of Oklahoma that you really can't find, or that you definitely don't learn in school. But definitely what's been in the headlines today is that Oklahoma's governor never issued a statewide stay-at-home directive. He recently stated he would never issue a statewide mask mandate. And this is really the background for the current state of Oklahoma's COVID-19 cases, right? Which are growing exponentially. I heard this yesterday, but there's 1 in every 100 residents in Oklahoma City is COVID positive. That is why I am staying in my home. 1 in 100, my sister is a doctor, and she was like, that's awful. Like, that's really awful. Just last night on World News Tonight, Lawton, Oklahoma was featured. So there's a hospital there that's over capacity, and I just saw that live. They were here reporting from that hospital. So it's definitely not looking great right now, but when you think about that fact that there's 85,000 undocumented people estimated in this state, and almost 150,000 immigrant workers comprise 8% of the labor force as of 2018, it's really no surprise that earlier this year, the immigrant-heavy workforce, particularly in rural Guymon, where there's a meatpacking plant, they bore the brunt of the first wave of infections, and there was nearly a quarter of their staff, which numbers in the thousands, that contracted COVID-19 in May. So, United We Dream realized that this was a time where undocumented communities needed support, and sometimes that just comes in checks and money. So United We Dream raised over $120,000 in like a couple of weeks, and 100% of that money went to assist the families in need. And then, of course, Dream Action Oklahoma is a local affiliate that launched 2 despensas comunitarias, or food pantry drives, and they also launched a COVID-19 relief fund in partnership with the Oklahoma City Public School System and staff. So mutual aid systems continue to be necessary in a state like ours, and it's directly impacted young people who are building those systems. And mutual aid is something that's radical. It's anti-state, and it's definitely something that I think has been always known in our communities, but just never named as like mutual aid and having a system based on values of community. So this is something that I haven't seen, and I've lived in Oklahoma my whole life. Additionally, people locked up in Oklahoma in detention facilities, correctional institutions, prisons, and county jails have been experiencing outbreaks. It's something that we sounded the alarm early as a coalition in Oklahoma City and the metro area, but of course nothing was done. So local law enforcement was still detaining and transferring people to ICE custody this whole time. And we know personally of cases of people who were deported during this pandemic. But we do what we can. We led a honkathon event at ICE detention facility in Okmulgee, and that was just to draw attention to the inhumane conditions there. This action was in addition to a victory last year, of course without the pandemic, but on the heels of a victory shutting down Fort Sill that was going to be used as a facility to house immigrant children in Lawton. So there are local groups, youth-led, young people just doing the work, disrupting, and there are local groups and coalitions that are working to expose collaboration with ICE on a statewide level, and this follows years-long fights to expose collaboration with ICE at the county and city level as well. And then just a quick note on the Black Lives Matter uprisings. Despite the pandemic, there were so many constant, consistent protests in the Oklahoma City metro area and Norman. And in Oklahoma, there were young people mobilizing in rural areas. And they often partnered with victims of police brutality, often from indigenous communities. For example, there were rallies in Clinton, Ada, Ardmore, Enid, Stillwater, Lawton, just to name a few, and I know not everyone's from here, so respectively, those populations were 9,000, 17,000, 24,000, 50,000, and 90,000, so these are not big places, but there were young people standing on street corners, so there's definitely momentum here that we can't afford to lose. In Oklahoma City, dozens were arrested and charged with terrorism and felonies after participating in certain protests. And then I don't know if you remember, but further taking advantage of inflaming the political climate, Trump decided to hold an indoor in-person rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And it was originally planned around Juneteenth, of course, which is a very prominent day of celebration for the Black communities. And the rally was located very close to Black Wall Street in Tulsa. So this drew national attention and local ire, especially when one person was arrested on live MSNBC for simply wearing a Black Lives Matter shirt. So something that really connected the dots locally between disenfranchised and vulnerable communities, corrupt politicians, immigration, the PIC, the prison industrial complex, all of it, was that the county government planned to spend $36 million of the federal CARES Act funding to go towards the jail trust, which oversees management of our Oklahoma County Jail. The Oklahoma County Jail collaborates with ICE and has been deemed federally unconstitutional because of the horrid conditions and the human rights violations. So it is actually one of the worst jails in the country. Immigrant youth and other directly impacted folks demanded accountability of local officials and that CARES Act money be spent on the communities that need it most. And this ultimately led to the jail trust sending $25 million back to the county government just this month. And this management is in addition to so much other mishandling of the CARES Act money. There were millions spent on police officers' mental health, not like our state's mental health isn't wildly underfunded. And then millions were also spent on renovating the tourist welcome centers across the state. I don't know how this is all panned out to be legal, but that is what we're up against. There was also a botched jail trust vote that took place recently, and it was to get ICE out of the jail, but the vote was like just invalid, and so that remains unresolved. And in the midst of people disrupting meetings, holding space outside public buildings this summer, the county government tried to silence local organizers by prohibiting free speech on city and county property. But we showed up, we spoke up at the meetings, and we had that vote overturned. So definitely immigrant youth this year and directly impacted young people are intervening in some of the most entrenched, corrupt political systems at the local, state, and federal levels. And it's clear that when they're at the forefront of community organizing work, their power is undeniable. And while elected officials, who could be pressured to lean more towards immigrant and racial justice, did not actually win in the Oklahoma elections, this was the first year when immigrant youth really electoralized their power. And of course, this year we saw the most votes ever cast for the presidential race in Oklahoma, the highest turnout statewide in over 20 years, early voting record numbers, and over 100,000 more people registered this year than last. And of course, you have to keep in mind that there's 1.6 million, I think, in this state that are not even registered to vote, and roughly 140,000 are disenfranchised due to their immigration status or a felony conviction. And that this election was in the midst of the earliest ice storm in our state's calendar year history, and it impacted up to, I think it was over 300,000 people in the Oklahoma City metro area who didn't have power up through election day, up until even last week. So this was all with many challenges in between, but young people showed up, and the lines between the corrupt politics, structural oppression in the state are really starting to become clearer for the younger generations, because they're the ones doing the grassroots initiatives. One of these examples is the state question 805 on the ballot that was to eliminate sentence enhancements for nonviolent offenders in the state, and it did not pass. And it was partly because there's a billionaire who is a board chair of the jail trust, and she threw all of her funding and organizational power behind defeating the state question. But indigenous people here, immigrant youth, directly impacted allies really know their strength, and know their strength and the challenges, the strength of their opponents going forward. And we're already finding some of the solutions. One of the really kind of hopeful stories is that yesterday an article came out about the Cherokee Nation in Northeast Oklahoma. They are implementing a COVID-19 response that world leaders have applauded. And it's because they have, the Cherokee Nation has a population of 140,000 people and have seen only 4,000 cases and 33 deaths. And this is in stark contrast to the Navajo Nation, which I'm sure we all have heard about, that has roughly the same population, but has seen 13,000 cases and over 600 deaths. So, together in Oklahoma, immigrants, young people, queer people, people of color, and indigenous have worked together to get another victory, which is the first non-binary Muslim person of color elected to the state house in Oklahoma. And that garnered well-deserved national applause. Mari Turner, I am just on the border of her district. But importantly, immigrant youth here understand the long game of shifting political climates. DAOK, Dream Action Oklahoma, participated in getting out the vote and getting out the count for the census this year. And they know that, of course, the census will have long-lasting effects on representation and distribution of resources. There are young people like Ricardo in this little clip here who is voting for the first, or voted for the first time this year, and is from a mixed status family, and who voted keeping in mind that he's doing it for the family members who can't vote yet, like his sister, who is protected temporarily by DACA. And Ricardo's story is just one, similar to many young people who come from mixed status households. And knowing that their undocumented family members can't vote, but they would be directly impacted by the next administration's policies, they not only went to the ballot box, they also organized their network of eligible voters to get out and vote. And we also, of course, put together a series of videos from first-time voters. So I would love to just share one before I start wrapping up. And this is Teddy. Teddy is in the DMV area, the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, and Luce is actually part of UWD staff, who is the sole breadwinner of her family right now because everyone lost their jobs due to COVID, and she has DACA.
My favorite class would have to be math because I'm good with numbers. I'm Teddy, I'm 18, and I go to Gaithersburg High School. My sisters have DACA, and Trump wants to deport them. Right now, both my parents are unemployed due to COVID, and my sister's the one paying all the bills. Danielle is a very creative person. She's an artiste, as I would say, and she's very on top of everything. Luz's best qualities is she's not a quitter. She keeps on fighting for what's right. She goes the extra mile. If it's not enough, she wants to do more. Them not being protected, it's a scary feeling. If DACA were to end, I have a chance of losing my family, and who am I without family? I want voters to know that their vote matters and has the power to protect families like mine. My sisters can't vote to stop Trump, but you and I can.
Yes, so that is Teddy. And stories like Teddy and Ricardo's are a testament to the work that young people are putting in to organize and encourage this historic number of voters, young voters who turned out. In fact, many immigrant youth from United We Dream Action did incredible work. I was part of the team that led the voter outreach mobilization efforts. We contacted over 2 million low propensity, undecided majority Latinx voters, and we made over 800,000 calls, and we sent over 3 million text messages in battleground states. And United We Dream Action PAC created ads to target Latinx people under 35, and those ads were viewed 97 million times. So when we think about the election and you see all these headlines about how the Latinx people won the election, it's all true. So
My favorite class.
Oops. All right. So just to conclude here, the results of their organizing efforts, our organizing efforts, is clearly reflected in the states that turned blue this year. We have to look to states like Arizona, Georgia, 2 states that Trump won in 2016, but which turned blue this year as a result of decades of community organizing. So that's a lot of what you don't hear is that, oh, they turned blue, but it's because of grassroots organizing for the past 10, 15 years. And, Oklahoma may only have 7 votes, but in races this tight, that can make a world of difference of whether we suffer and struggle to survive for 4 more years or whether we have room to breathe and opportunity to push for bold policy changes that are systemically progressive and solutions that our communities need and deserve. So it may take decades. It may take several decades, but I feel and I know in my heart that change starts with directly impacted people who have the courage to lead, disrupt, and organize. And that's just like what we've seen in Oklahoma this year. So I appreciate you so much for listening to me at the end of your long day, and I'm happy to take any questions, and I can send the PowerPoint to you, Eric, to send out for reference as well. But
Thank you very much. You guys can turn your mics on and clap if you want for a few seconds.
Uh-oh.
Are you prepared for some questions from some hard-hitting academics?
Yes, please. I'm ready.
Are they? That's the question.
Okay, I'll jump in again since I'm
It's your job.
just to get things rolling. So Serena, thank you very much. That was excellent. It was really interesting. And not just a small bit sort of inspiring, right? So thank you very much for all of that. I guess, you made a comment, momentum we can't afford to lose, that caught my ear. And then also I'm looking at the last video and thinking about the focus on the election. And so my question to you is, since you have your fingers so much better on the pulse than I do, what is the sense following the election? Are we going to keep that momentum and move us forward back into the local and sort of some of these other races that you're talking about? Or, is there going to be a gasp of relief and we're going to have to sort of go back and rebuild some of this architecture that you guys have put into place?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's funny because we were like celebrating the victory, although we know that they're going to do everything they can to slow down progress and the transition. But we're already thinking about midterms. And of course, the Georgia runoff is what we're thinking about. We're actually trying to figure out ways to help local efforts there. Because if we win those seats in the Senate, we know that with Kamala as a tiebreaker, we can really push some policies and legislation that can help communities that need it without hurting others, which when I say that, I mean like at the expense of border communities or, DACA dreamer parents. But that's kind of what we're going to set our eyes on is community organizing and more political education for our base. And as always, just growing leaders to be able to do the local work in the local elections, which is where we foresee a lot of the change happening. I led a team of like almost 100 voter leads that are all immigrant youth here, and they will be the ones leading the work moving forward. So just all around inspiring. But that is the kind of momentum we need to keep up, is momentum and engaging our base, but also our members and also the leaders for our leadership pipeline. Thanks for your question.
Can I ask, I really enjoyed your talk. Thank you so much. It's nice to hear, these stories of progress and success. I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about how you ended up doing this work, like how you got inspired.
Yeah, sure. So what was I doing? I went to OU. I did international and area studies and Spanish and economics. And then I did go to grad school in London for development studies. So I wanted to work in developing countries and figure out how I can best help and be that like savior there, right? I come back here, I start working with refugees in Oklahoma City and resettlement and job development for them. And I don't know, I just realized that like there's so much here that needs to be done. We're definitely not like this first world country that people think we are. And that's how I got involved and started volunteering with Dream Action Oklahoma. And I was just really embraced by the Latinx community here because Asian American and AAPI organizing is really not a thing in Oklahoma yet. So I got involved with the Latinx community and started doing community organizing around DACA there. And that's how I got exposed to United We Dream. And I don't know, definitely thought about going back to school a few times, but realized that like everyone should be a community organizer if they're going to be leaders in like grassroots work. is what I kind of came to realize, and so I'm still here with United We Dream.
Great, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
How big is United We Dream? Kind of give us an overview of the superstructure.
That's a really good question. As I Google the number of members, I do know that we have almost 100 affiliate groups across the country. So if that gives you a good idea, I think we have 500,000 or over 500,000 on our email list, and our social media following, of course, is huge. But yeah, we have close to 100 affiliates across the country.
Serena, I very much enjoyed your talk, and have to follow up on Ron's comment about keeping the momentum alive. And what I find particularly troubling is not only the vicious voices we've heard during the past 4 years, which are bad enough by themselves, but I see this as just another chapter in the continuing saga of immigrants in this country being discriminated against, when in fact everybody in this country is an immigrant or the descendant of an immigrant. But the Irish went through this in the 1800s. The Italians went through it in the early 1900s. We interred the Japanese during World War II. And, you know, I just wonder, and creating new policies is one thing, but it seems to me that there's a bigger issue, and that's just the general attitude of people. And your thoughts on that, on how can we just change our attitudes that will result in legislation?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And it's something that I forgot to mention too is, you know, part of the benefits of having United We Dream Action PAC, a political action committee, is that we can endorse people. And so we endorsed close to 30 races because we have a policy platform about politicians being dedicated to our what we call a free to move, free to stay platform. And so it's a bunch of different policy stances about immigration. If they commit to that, and if we can work with them, then we'll endorse them. We endorsed around 30 and 19 won. So some of those are formerly undocumented immigrants themselves. So one way that we can, you know, change the system is actually getting our people elected into office. And then the other part, to answer your question, is we had, like I mentioned, we had 100 people doing outreach on a regular basis daily to voters. And we talked to people. We had hard scripts. One was actually identifying where they landed on immigrant justice support, 1 to 5. And they self-identified. And we had people who were very strongly against immigrants, and some that were very oh, I like the DACAs, the Dreamers, but everyone else, you know, they need to go through the process or whatever. We've heard it all, right? But there are young people that are having those conversations with cold contacts, the past 3 or 4 months, and they've changed their minds. There are some conversations where people were talking to Trump supporters, and then later when we follow up with them, they voted differently. At least they told us that. So, I mean, we have to work on the macro scale of government, getting our people elected, but we also have to continue having hard conversations with those who don't agree with us. And then we have to continue mobilizing our own people, because there's, you know, immigrants, there's so many divisions within immigrant communities. There's very, very prominent anti-Blackness in immigrant communities. That came up this year, pretty hard in your own families even, where you have to address that. But I would see those 3 things. We get our own people elected in office, we continue to educate and mobilize our base and our members, and then we actually have to have those hard conversations with people who don't agree with us to change their, forgive me, but hearts and minds, right?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any more questions for Serena?
Yeah, I've got one. Serena, what can we do as individuals to support United We Dream?
Oh, thank you for that question, Laurel. Besides the obvious one of donating, I know that, academics really contribute in big ways to just data and research in general. And something I had to tell another group I was speaking to was involve young people in your conversations and in your research. Involve directly impacted people. They're the ones that have the most stake in all the processes and all the government. I think the Gen Zers are the ones who are like estimated to have less than their parents as they age. So definitely just try to capture the voices of the younger people, of your students, and learn from them. I would say flip it a little bit, because I'm constantly working with young people. I'm constantly like, oh my gosh, I like behind everything, not just on TikTok and social media, but like they are really woke. I'm telling you, I was so surprised. They just understand the systemic issues in a way deeper way than I could have if I was there, when I was their age. So involve and listen to young people, directly impacted people, and just listen and maybe like switch roles every once in a while and not be the teacher or the lecturer. I don't know, does that make sense?
You bet it does. Thanks for the reminder.
Yes, thanks for the question, Laurel.
Any more questions? I think we owe Serena a nice applause, Zoom style, whatever that is. And we really appreciate this. It's been a neat experience. I mean, we're going through our first Zoom conference ever as a group. So you're maybe the highlight of it so far. It's good to hear vibrancy in youth and things like that. So no other business. I've sent out emails for tomorrow's program. You should be in your email boxes. And thank you, Serena, one more last time, and good luck to you. There was some talk about using the GeoBowl slot as a social. So I'll get on at 7 and see if anyone's there. But someone needs to communicate to Bill that it's BYOB. It is Zoom. So thank you, Serena.
Thank you all so much. Have a fun, happy hour.
And anyone's welcome to stay on here too, so.
Take care. Get some rest, Eric.
I got
You'll
the
be back when the week is done.
No, I still got to work this week. You
Don't
should
we
see all
all?
the emails from students, missing 2 days near the end of the semester.
Yep. Thanks so
Have a
much
good
for your
night.
efforts. Bye.
Bye-bye. Take care, everyone. See you,
Bye.
Emily. See you, Robert. Have a good, Raymond, are you going to be on later in case we do
Yeah,
something?
I'll fire up the meeting for you, so I'll see you there.
Okay, I have no idea if people will show up, so.
Yeah,
it
but
may
you
just
guys
be a
already have the slot,
5-minute.
so I'll go ahead and get it fired up, so that way if people show up, they can all mingle.
Is there a way not to record it?
Yeah, I can turn the record off.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. See you in a bit.